Welcome to Practical Christian Lessons, and today we're going to be talking about magicians, snakes, and the Exodus. Let's get into it. Hello, and if you're new here, this series going through the Zondervan Archaeological Study Bible. It's important you get the archaeological if you try to find this. It is out of print, so if you try to find a physical copy, you might have difficulty, and it will be expensive. The point of going through these essays in this particular essay is on page 86. I'm going to have to get my glasses. And the particular point of this series is going through and comparing the theology of the Old Testament. So the theology we find in the pages of Scripture with the theology of the pagans and other cultures around them, and demonstrating that despite modern claims, and going with the older scholarly consensus, is that the differences in the Old Testament theology, the theology of the Hebrews, the later Israelites, and what became Christianity, is so starkly different from their neighbors, it can't have just been an evolution or a development of theology from it. There was a shift in the scholarship about 80 years ago now, and John Oswalt notes this really well in his book, The Bible Among the Myths. I highly recommend it. You can find a used copy for very cheap online. It's a wonderful book. And the shift was not because of new evidence. If anything, I'd argue the evidence that has come out since then, in between now, and even leading up to that moment, was in favor of the hypothesis I put forward. And the shift was in mindset. It was a shift in philosophical thought, really, where they stopped looking at the differences and started looking at the similarities, right? So instead of the Hebrews and the Israelites worshiping a single deity, which is extremely radical for the ancient world, the only groups that rejected a pantheon were generally those who rejected all gods. And those groups were even then extremely rare, of little influence, didn't impact much, and were very isolated as far as like interacting with other groups. Whereas the new idea is, when looking at like pagan pantheons and such, they have a bunch of deities and then one supreme deity at the top. All the Hebrews and the Israelites did was cut out those other deities and say they weren't real gods. Which, if you read the Old Testament, you'll find a big problem with that idea in the first place. Not that they weren't real gods. Clearly, they're not the creator God in the Old Testament theology. But they were regularly worshipped and idolatry happened. But that, like, you see the radical difference in those two trains of thought. And that seems like a strange evolution. You would think you'd have a more gradual evolution if it was an evolution of thought. You'd think it'd be more slower and gradual. There's plenty of other problems with the theories, but we're not going to get into those right now. We are going to read an essay on the Egyptian priest and their snakes. It's a very, very small essay here in the bottom. And then we're also going to talk about what the Exodus was, and an important nestling that into ancient mythology. This is on Exodus 7 is where this essay is. The Bible frequently records particular events without explaining how they happened, and often much to many scholars' chagrin. Exodus 7, for example, reveals the Egyptian magicians mimicked Moses changing his staff into a snake by their secret arts in verse 11. This could mean that they employed supernatural power and actually changed staffs into snakes. The Bible, however, does not explicitly state whether or not supernatural agents, either divine or demonic, were involved. For the record, I take the idea that it was actual dark magic. The majority of scholars believe that the Egyptians used mere trickery on this occasion, which is plausible. It's on the table. I can't say it didn't happen. Throughout the ancient world, pagan priests regularly deceived gullible people. E.g., a priest would hide in a large hollowed-out idol and speak for a god. You'll find some interesting things they did. So the Egyptians could have used sleight of hand, analogous to modern stage magicians performing tricks with animals. Evidence also reveals that Egyptians regularly practiced a method of snake charming that allowed them to put snakes into a kind of catalepsy, whereby they would remain as stiff as a rod until awakened. This trick is still practiced today in Egypt. It is helpful to recognize that the purpose of this biblical text was not to debunk Egyptian magic, but to show that the power of Israel's God was greater than any power Egypt possessed. When Moses' snake swallowed the Egyptian snakes, the event predicted disaster for the Pharaoh. A representative snake for Israel's God had defeated one of Egypt's national symbols. The serpent, an animal considered sacred in Lower Egypt, where Moses' confrontation with the Pharaoh was taking place. And that's good. And I've gone through the essays in Exodus, and unless there's just one in the later parts I didn't see, this is something I wish they had delved in more with the plagues. So, clearly, as they said, the point of these was to demonstrate the superiority, the power of Israel over the false gods of Egypt. In this case, over the dark magic of the sages, of whatever you want to call them, magicians. So, there's not much there to parse out difference other than, of course, source, right? The source of the magic of the Egyptians was their pagan idols, was rituals. And, I mean, we have tons of ancient Egyptian magic books, basically, going through magic rituals. And I have one down here beside me on, I think it's the Assyrians, the Babylonian Empire. That's that one. And goes through some of their magic rituals and some of the things they did. When you look at the things, even where, like, Moses has to go do things, like go strike a rock, the difference in detail in those rituals is immense. But I really want to talk about, like, the 10 plagues. The 10 plagues, and I wish more study Bibles would go into this too. I haven't found many that do. I would have expected them to go into it, like, with an essay, like a full-form essay. That would have been nice. I think it gets touched on in the notes. But it's an attack on different deities of the Egyptian, right? There is a deity of the river that is turned into blood. The final one, darkness, the most powerful deity in the Egyptian pantheon was Ra, is the sun god. And darkness is eliminated throughout all the land, except for where the Hebrews are, right? There's a lot of miraculous signs happening here, and it's the Lord Adonai showing his superiority over these false gods of the Egyptians. And this is an important thing to understand about Old Testament theology, and why, depending on how you're defining monotheism, it's not always accurate. Because if your definition of monotheism is denying the existence of these other beings, that's not accurate. The Bible doesn't do that. It repeatedly, in fact, affirms their existence. What it just does is it says those aren't God. They're not the creators. All those things you've been told about them, all those stories of them conquering Leviathan and bringing order into the chaotic creation, that's false. That's not true. You see that in the very beginning of the book. That's how it opens, as a polemic against this ideology, this theology of the ancient world. It says, no, there was nothing. The Lord brought creation into existence without any chaos, without having to conquer anything. He had complete control. And in this, right, some people have tried to argue that this is seen as a creation myth in the Exodus. The Lord is coming in and conquering these other beings. This happens in a lot of ancient Near East mythology and Egyptian mythology. I think Egyptian mythology. My Egyptian mythology is a little out of date. By out of date, I mean rusty, so please don't critique me too harshly if I get some things wrong here. Of conquering things. And then that is how creation is brought forth, whether that's monsters, whether that's chaos, whatever. And the Lord is coming in and conquering these Egyptian deities. He is showing that they are not the true God. And some people have tried to argue that's how the creation myth happens. The problem is, this isn't portrayed as a creation myth. Yes, this is the creation of God's people. He pulls them out of Egypt and then makes his own nation. That's how it's described in Deuteronomy. It mirrors the language of Genesis 1-2. We've actually discussed that in a Trinitarian video on my channel, The Holy Spirit in the Old Testament, if you want to go check out that. It's in the introduction, so it's there very early. But the story of the Exodus isn't a story of creation. It's a story of uncreation, if you read it. And it opens up clearly hearkening back to Genesis. The people are multiplying, they're spreading out over all the earth. In Robert Alter's work, in his translation of Genesis, he goes through the parallels, specific parallels of Genesis language. And, like, the people are described as swarming like the insects were in Genesis. And points out how, and we talked about in our last video, and if you want to have discussions on the Exodus narrative and, like, the historiography, we'll have some links there to talk about, like, the actual Exodus path. And we'll put them again in this one, actually. Like how the word for Noah's little basket he's put in is the same word for ark in Genesis 6-11 that Noah goes in. So there's a bunch of intentional parallels. But here, the Lord isn't creating. He's destroying. He's unmaking, right? He's going through how the Egyptians see things that have brought forth the life, their deities, and destroying it. He's not just defeating their deities. He's unmaking their creation. And that's how this is portrayed. It is this massive polemical act of the Lord, demonstrating his not only superiority, not only that these beings are not the true creator, but that he has the power to undo everything you think that these false gods have done. And that is so radically different than how you see other ancient mythologies paint these kinds of battles. It's not a creation narrative. It is an undoing of their very acts in a very fundamental way. And if someone has an essay on that, or a book that goes over that, please put that in the comments. I would love to look at that. That's something I enjoy reading about and really want to delve into more. But I can't delve that much more into it. Like with all the studies and stuff I'm doing, I don't have time to just set time aside to go find something like that. So if someone has something as a really good recommendation, please put that in the comments for myself and others. And that's where we'll end today. So I still have my glasses on. I don't need this on. If you guys want to interact in the comments, give pushback, give thoughts. If you're an Egyptologist and I made some errors, please correct me or direct an Egyptologist my way. I am open to correction on things I'm wrong on. If you're going to have comments, please let them be constructive. Don't just say, you're wrong. give an argument and actual reasoning and talking points that can be engaged with. And if you want to say if you're inquiring into the Christian faith or you're trying to look into these things, we have a Discord in the doobly-doo below. Feel free to join us there. Ask questions. Ask questions in the comments. Ask questions there. Wherever. We're open to dialogue. So please check those things out. I'm going to trying to look at my calendar. I'm not sure if this is coming out before or after Christmas. If it's before Christmas, you guys have a wonderful Christmas and a Happy New Year. If it's after, then I hope you had a wonderful Christmas and have a Happy New Year. You guys have a wonderful day. God bless.